standing orders be suspended for the remainder of the day sitting. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. The aforementioned standing orders are so hereby suspended.
Government business.
Government business is now the order of the day.
Order number 6, sir. In the name of the Honorable Minister of Home Affairs, to move the second reading of the Immigration Amendment Bill 2019.
Honorable member for St. James North.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. The Immigration Automated Passport Control Kiosks Bill 2019, which is before this Honorable Parliament today. In fact, an amendment to the Immigration Act, represents the third amendment to the Immigration Act, which we are requesting this Parliament to make within the last 6 weeks. You would recall, of course, Mr. Speaker, as all honourable members would as well, that last month we would have brought to this Parliament and secured the approval of honourable members of the bill relating to advanced passenger information systems to enhance the border security of our country, whereby information on persons travelling to and, in fact, departing from Barbados would be supplied to the relevant authorities no less than 40 minutes before the departure of the flight. And of course, border security, we are all aware, sir, is of paramount importance in today's age as we seek to wrestle criminal activity to the ground, and where we will succeed in so doing, sir. We then brought an amendment to the Immigration Act in terms of minimizing the category of prohibited persons who legislatively could be denied entry into Barbados, something that was long overdue. As we said, sir, we're on a statute book up to last month. An immigration officer could, if they felt foolish enough to do so, could, for example, have prohibited a person with a disability, immobility, visually impaired person from traveling, and even though, of course, factually that might not happen, so the fact is that it was still on the legislative books. And this process here today, sir, is to amend the Immigration Act to bring into legislative effect the utilization of kiosks, sir, and to provide legislative recourse for the removal of or the replacement of the present day ED forms, which we all have to sign and which everyone traveling to Barbados is given prior to arrival in Barbados, whether on the plane or on arrival at the airport, to fill out. So the basis of the ED forms that, as of now, everyone traveling to Barbados is required to fill out, complete, and hand to an immigration officer is a 2007 amendment to the regulations of the Immigration Act, statutory instrument 2007 number 28, and that, as I said, sir, is required for entry into Barbados. We know it, sir. It requires some information that, quite frankly, is absolutely unnecessary. I mean, you're a Barbadian citizen or permanent resident. The authorities, immigration authorities, can't stop you from entering. In the case, of course, you're born in Barbados, your navel string buried here, but yet you have to fill out as part of that ED form, for example, where you reside. Well, that information is known, sir, or where you're going to live. I mean, why should the state be intruding into that to know where you're going to now live? Your passport number, sir, is filled out, as you know, sir, and where the passport was issued and the date it was issued, and if you're a Barbadian. All of this information, sir, is now captured and available to the immigration authorities and other relevant authorities in Barbados due to our connection with the Joint Regional Communications Center, which is a regional border security authority and which has access to this information. So therefore, this information is available to the Barbadian authorities and can be acquired, and indeed is acquired at will on any traveller to and from Barbados. And that was what the first amendment to the Immigration Act, which I spoke of just now, which was brought last month, was about. So it is redundant and repetitive to continue with these ED forms, just duplicating information, just creating space, because these ED forms, hundreds of thousands of them, sir, have to be stored somewhere. And we're trying to move towards e-government, towards paperless society and administration. And this is one of the thrusts of this administration's effort to modernize Barbados and to bring into the third decade of the 21st century an ease of doing business, not only for the citizens of Barbados and the residents of Barbados, but for those who visit our country. Because, of course, tourism is still our #1 foreign exchange earner. And with the efforts, of course, of the Honourable Member for St. James Central, the Minister of Tourism, we are already improving our tourist product in many ways. So this whole process ties into that whole context where we are making life easier for all those, whether local citizens, tourists, who happen to be in Barbados and who, in this specific case, arrive in Barbados. It is within this context, sir, that we last week brought the Town and Country Planning Amendment Act. Debate opened by, of course, the Honourable Prime Minister, and the hard work for that act grounded by the significant efforts of the Honourable Member for St. Michael South Central, who has more than proved her worth in the Cabinet and Government of Barbados, sir. It is within that context that we are working on easing the process to renew driver's licenses. The Honourable Members for Christchurch West and St. Lucie giving ministerial leadership to that process. It is within that process, sir, that we are looking to vastly limit the time it takes to obtain police certificates of character and accident reports. Way too long at the present time, sir, and the Honourable Member in the other place, the Minister of Innovation, Science and Technology, who so ably spoke about this process, in fact, at my branch meeting 2 evenings ago, looking to digitalize this process and remove the current situation where you have to search through tens of thousands, I think it is about 65,000 records, paper records, to see if someone has a clean police certificate of character, and some things, sir, that, as we know, and as you, sir, as a leading criminal lawyer in this country knows, about 85% of persons require to get a job, and by the time they get the certificate, some weeks after the job gone through the headers, in some cases, in most cases probably. This is part of that process, sir. E-government, digitalization of government, ease in business, using information technology, using the technology to improve the quality and the speed of delivery of high-demand services, as page 33 of the 2018 manifesto of the Barbados Labour Party so eloquently enunciates. The practical aspect of this is that 17 kiosks were purchased by the previous administration, so we came and found them. 16 are functional at the present time. It is our intention, sir, when financial resources, as soon as financial resources allow, to get more kiosks, sir, because with our growing tourism market and arrivals and, of course, increased travels, we anticipate that the 17 that are there would not be adequate enough in the long term, sir. But yes, the previous administration brought these kiosks, but as was their norm, sir, did nothing to bring them into effect. So they were there from, I believe, 2017, sitting down at the airport, taking up space. And as usual, the government of the 10 lost years did nothing about it, even though it was clear that the whole world, both developed world and developing world, was moving towards the process of automated entry on arrival in Barbados of passengers, and doing away with this tremendous paper wastage which marks the present situation in our country, which we are seeking to remove starting today by this in terms of legislation, sir. The machines, as I said, full name Automated Passport Control Kiosks, which we will call kiosks. And the process is that a passenger on arrival will approach this kiosk, would put in their passport, and a picture would be taken. You will face the kiosk, a frontal and full picture of your facial image would be taken to identify you for obvious purposes. Then the kiosk would prompt you to answer some questions, a couple questions, sir, and in real time provide answers to that. Split seconds, sir. They would have the answers and would produce 2 receipts. In fact, for the immigration purposes, 1 receipt, defined in the Act as an entry receipt. That receipt would either bear the letters PG, in other words, pass granted or permission granted, which means that entry has been granted by the passenger into the country, or X, in which case, Mr. Speaker, the passenger would be required to go to an immigration officer and be further examined to see why they have an X. Now, they may very well just have an X because of a slight defect in the system. It may very well not mean that they are someone on whom an alert has come up in terms of not being a desirable person to enter Barbados. So maybe, I think, most kiosks in the world are not 100% foolproof, and it is estimated that maybe in terms of 15% of the X's, may be nothing to worry about at all. And obviously we will work towards minimizing that percentage as much as possible, realizing, of course, that this process is still new. But once you get a PG, sir, it means, as I said, that your entry is permitted. Nothing has been found on you in terms of risk or negative border security. And you go and you hand the immigration entry receipt to the immigration officer. And we want to be sure, sir, that the immigration officer now, sir, is not going to waste time and duplicate an effort that has already been carried out and undertaken by the kiosk. The immigration officer, sir, is merely to look at you, look at the photo which the kiosk has taken and which is on the entry receipt, ensure that it is the same person, and when they see PG, let the person through to enter into the baggage clearance section of the arrival area so that they could collect the baggage and then move towards customs. Immigration will understand, sir, that they aren't to waste time. The effort has already been done. The kiosk has given all the information. There's to be no searching the passport, no to look at the passport information, wasting time, sir. The reality of the situation is that for a tourist, the point of contact in Barbados at the airport is their first point of contact. And we all know that first impressions count a lot, sir. That's a fact of the matter. Some people don't get a chance to create a second impression. And a first impression of a tourist who is part of the major foreign exchange prop of Barbados, part of the major plank of the economic and consequentially social development of Barbadians, has to be the airport, is in fact the airport. And so the typical tourist coming from England, North America, England, United Kingdom still constitutes our major tourist market. I believe, 37% of our tourists annually come from United Kingdom. We know that's an 8-hour flight. After 8 hours in a plane, sir, many of us in here, including you, sir, have traveled on, 12-hour flights. It is true, 13 hours, in some cases 11 and a half, but 8 hours is still a lengthy flight. 8-hour flight from United Kingdom. The length of it may be tempered by the tourists, whether they're a first-time visitor or they've come here 70 times, like many tourists who are here right now, as we speak, out of the gloomy winter of their country. But it may be tempered by the realization that they're coming to Barbados, the gem of the Caribbean, sir. But still, 8 hours is 8 hours. And after you're on a flight for 8 hours, you want to get off the flight, you want to get out the airport, you want to go on the beach, you want to go and drink some Bajan rum, you want to start enjoying your vacation. You don't want to be held up at an airport more than is necessary, sir. And this is all part of that process. Not only, though, for the tourists, sir, but for our own people as well. The Kiosks, as I said, sir, scans the passport, takes the photo, prompts the passenger to respond honestly, sir, to the series of questions, verifying biographic and flight information. This is all biometrics, sir. And as I said, security, sir, has not been compromised in this process. We have ensured that the security of Barbados, especially at this time, is not being compromised by this process. So there's no need to worry about that. And once, as I said, the entry receipt produces PG, handed to the immigration officer, who verifies that the person handing him the receipt is the same person whose photo is on the receipt. The processing of the passenger's entry into Barbados is complete. So this whole process started in August last year with a pilot project. Pilot project ran for about 3 months, just from around crop over time, of course, when we would have had an influx of visitors, until about September, October. Teething problems have been ironed out, sir, and I first want to give tremendous credit to the Honourable Prime Minister for driving this process, for insisting, sir, that we get where we are today in terms of being able to bring to Parliament a bill to legislatively bring into effect this process. Prime Minister has been adamant that this has to be done during this tourist season. We can't be left behind, sir. We have to move on as a country, as a nation. We have had to come from virtual ground, sir, where we were basically in May last year, when the political party of which I am a proud member took over the administration of this country, a bankrupt economy, challenges on all fronts, economically, socially, all fronts, sewerage, buses, garbage trucks, we tackling all, sir. Lack of foreign exchange, reserves, high debt. We've had to tackle all fronts, sir, and all simultaneously. And we have not recoiled from doing so. And this is one of the areas that is we found as paramount importance. The Prime Minister insisted on us taking this process. I want to give credit, sir, to the technocrats, the public servants who have enabled us to be where we are today, sir. The immigration department, the management of it, both at headquarters, at the airport, the tourism officials, sir, both in the ministry itself and the tourism authority, and led in this case, as I said before, by the Honourable Minister of Tourism, the member for St. James Central, the officials of the Grantley Adams Airport, and also the stakeholders at the airport, those with an interest in for example, seeing the passengers who make use of the executive services of the airport through. The customs officials, the customs department were involved. We've had a series of meetings on this issue to iron out the teething problems arising, which we, of course, would have discovered from the pilot project. All of these officials have to take credit in this process where we are today. We've had reports on it. Of course, we were able to look at those reports and address them. And I'm not saying, sir, that we have reached Olympus. There will still be some teething problems, as I'm sure that every reasonable person would expect. But coming out of the pilot project, we have to make a start legislatively. All persons will be eligible to utilize the kiosk, with the exception of unaccompanied minors, and minors is defined in the bill, in the regulations, which will be made subsequent to the passage of this bill. Minors is defined as an individual under 19 years old. And that is standard in terms of best practice in the world, that a minor traveling by themselves will still have to approach and be checked in by an immigration officer, sir. And I mean, that makes common sense, sir, because I mean, the minor is not an adult, and therefore we want to verify that everything is okay, sir. Other persons who will not be able to use the kiosk, again, understandably, would be those whose passport can't be read by the kiosk. Now, my understanding, sir, is that every Barbadian who has a passport would have a passport that is readable by the kiosk, because changes started to be made from 2004, when the Barbados Labour Party was last in government, in terms of giving Barbadians on application for a passport that would be readable by this kiosk, because the world was moving towards that process. I'm also informed, sir, that citizens of virtually every other country in the world should have a passport that is readable by the kiosk, because by virtue of an international agreement under the IATA, sir, countries from, I believe it might have been around 2010, had to move towards giving their citizens machine-readable passports. If that had not yet been done previously, as I said, Barbados, for example, had been doing since the year 2004. And therefore, everyone should be eligible to use the kiosks. There may be occasions, sir, and let's be practical, because sometimes now, at this time of the year, high winter season, 4 or 5 big jets on the tarmac at the same time at Grantley Adams on a Saturday afternoon, and the multitude of passengers therefore arriving in Barbados, these big jets holding, 300 passengers almost. I mean, not everyone may be able, when the airport is at full capacity in terms of arrival of passengers, to use the kiosk, because, as I said, sir, we only have 16 there that are functioning. So they would, under those circumstances, still be the great possibility, indeed probability, that some passengers would have to see some immigration officers to be checked in, sir. That is the reality of the situation. As I said, sir, we intend to acquire more kiosks as soon as finances allow. We know, sir, that this government has, more than any other government in the past, has had to juggle the financial resources. In fact, on a daily basis, the Honourable Prime Minister, the Honourable Member for Christchurch, East Central, sir, being frontal in that exercise, that every passenger coming to Barbados will be able practically to utilize the kiosk. You might, for purposes still of being able to get out as fast as possible, some may still have, under those circumstances that I described, to have to go to an immigration officer. But the fact is that on the majority of occasions, flights arriving in Barbados, the morning flights, which, because most passengers arrive in the afternoon, not the morning, so all the morning arrivals should be able to utilize the kiosks. So by simplifying this process, as I said, there will be a tremendous ease in terms of the ability at the present time as well, replacing all Barbadian passports into Canada easily. Some would say it's because Canada, although one of the largest countries in the world, I believe maybe the fourth or fifth largest country in the world, only has a population of second largest country in the world. Minister, the honourable member for Christchurch West, who is very familiar with Canada, has said, and yes, he's correct. Second largest in the world. It only has a population of about 35 million odd, and therefore needs people. So some might say that is as a result of the policy. That is why they have this policy, but the fact is that they do have it. And we've taken the Canadian model as a guide here. Additionally, sir, we have taken the decision that only those passengers entering Barbados who require their passport to be stamped for whatever purpose would have their passport stamped by immigration. And so again, this is how it is moving. Jamaica already has that in place, passports not stamped. Canada as well no longer stamps passports. If in Canada, if a passport is required in the traveller's passport as proof of entry, this must be requested from a border services officer after completing the kiosk transaction. And that is what we're moving towards. I mean, some of us have traveled to countries, let's face it, Cuba, let's give an example, where we may have determined that we don't need a stamp in our passport, and we know the reason why, sir. So that doesn't mean we haven't been to Cuba, sir. We've been. Certainly I have been. So there's no magic in a stamp in your passport. The information that you have entered Barbados, whether as a citizen, resident, or tourist, non-resident, is there in the system. And if you want a record at any time of whether you entered into Barbados or how many times you entered into Barbados or what date you entered into Barbados, you could get that easily from the immigration and other authorities. If the authorities need, the authorities obviously have the record of your entry, and again, I mean, if we were to still continue with the existing procedure that your passport stamp, again, that's going to take up time, sir. That is redundant, repetitive, and we're looking to make entry into Barbados easier for you. The regulations, sir, will give legislative force to what is defined in the regulations as a facilitation officer, and who will be available to assist an individual in their use of the kiosks if needs be, sir. I mean, there may be some elderly people who may not be familiar with a kiosk, they may not be comfortable with it, and facilitation officers, sir, whatever, customer service, reps, whatever you may wish to call them, but as I said in the bill, in the regulation defined as facilitation officers, will be there to assist you. These individuals are employed by the airport, sir. Some are in place already. I believe that it is the intention of the airport to employ even more as this procedure gets into full effect. In addition to this, sir, we are not looking at this in a vacuum. In addition to this, the Cabinet of Barbados, sir, has agreed that the Immigration Department, immigration officials will be removed from the departure hall at the airport as of February the 1st this year. This has been tried on 2 previous occasions, sir. And on both occasions, immigration officials were reinstated there. And so I'm not being partisan, political, sir, as I'm accused of a lot of cases, sir. Both administrations previously have tried this, only to put immigration back in. We are confident, sir, that we can try this again because of the enhanced border security details that are now available and that have been put in place because of the APIS, sir, the real-time transmission of information on each and every passenger that is now available to the authority of Barbados. And that is the main reason why immigration was restored in the past on the 2 previous occasions to the departure hall. But we believe, sir, that we can remove immigration from that process without any compromise of our border security. So, and the public of Barbados can be fully satisfied that we will not compromise the security of our borders in any way, sir, as a government. But the fact of the matter is that, again, when there are many passengers departing from Barbados, both citizens of Barbados, tourists, on some occasions, I mean, Saturday afternoons, probably at this time of the year in December, whatever, tourist winter season, in the northern world, that there is a backup of people after they have booked in now to get into the departure lounge to board, getting ready to board the airport, their aircraft. Because you have customs, as we know, sir. Well, first you have the guard just outside the door before you enter the departure hall. That guard employed by the airport, sir. And that guard is checking your passports to ensure that the picture on the passport is the person who is presenting the passport to the guard. And then, of course, as of now, sir, as I said, we have decided to remove it. You have the immigration officials inside, 3 or 4 booths, 3 or so immigration officials there at one time, depending on how full the departure hall is, and people now looking to board. And then, as you know, sir, there's the security check there with the inspection of the baggage that you're carrying on the plane. So 3 layers. And of necessity, sir, with one of the layers there's a backup, long line. I mean, people, some of whom need to board the flight because the flight can take off soon. You know, you're getting nervous. All of this could negatively impact on your experience in Barbados, even though you've had a great time. And therefore, Cabinet has decided to remove one of the layers, sir. And we are satisfied that this can be done, as I said now for the 3rd time, by an administration. But we're satisfied that the border security issues will still be in place, because we still have, of course, immigration officials at the airport. We have police officials there. If it is picked up by the APIS that there is a passenger who is suspect seeking to board, the information has been passed on, sir, in real time, from the time that passenger books in to the relevant authorities, who can pick up, question, delay the person, whatever. And we therefore look forward to this process, sir. Once this bill, sir, is passed, and we wish to anticipate that, of course, sir, by both houses of Parliament. There are regulations which will need to be, of course, amended as well, sir. Under Section 31 of the Immigration Act, the Minister of Immigration has the authority to make regulations which are subject to negative resolution, sir, so they would not have to be debated in this Parliament. Cabinet has already approved those regulations, sir. In addition to that, the customs regulations would need to be amended to give effect to the second receipt that is produced by the kiosks. As we know, sir, in addition to this ED form, which is presently handed to the immigration officials, which, as I said, compels you to give information that certainly as a Barbadian citizen is unnecessary and is not, the state already has it, but even so, I mean, the state doesn't have to know where an individual going to tonight if they're a Barbadian citizen. But the second receipt, we know that on the back of that ED form, there's a customs declaration form at present, sir, and that would have been made, in fact, under the customs regulations, which first came into effect in 1963, and whereby under Section Provision 83, the owner of any baggage brought into a customs area shall immediately attend upon the proper officer and answer such questions as the officer may put to him. The owner shall make such declarations in writing, including a declaration in forms C23 or C24, as the case may be, relating to the baggage that they have. And so we therefore will be making the regulations subject to Cabinet's approval in the very near future, hopefully, sir, as part of this whole process, to remove the requirement for the passenger to fill out this customs declaration, because the kiosk is going to produce a second receipt as well, which will have information relating to customs, and which the passenger will present to the customs officer in lieu of the present declaration form. We know that the declaration form at present, sir, mandates you to answer questions like if you're carrying, I believe, is over 10,000 Barbados dollars in cash, or if you're carrying drugs, if you have, I believe, over a certain amount of alcohol, if you have some kind of food products. We know the questions, sir. And again, we will move swiftly to ensure that the customs regulations are in place as well to legislatively legitimize utilization of the kiosk for the purposes of customs as well. So I said earlier that the removal of some immigration officers, because so many won't be required from the arrival hall, as well as the removal of immigration officers from the departure hall, will of necessity therefore free up immigration to do other aspects of their mandate. And we certainly, sir, look forward to immigration being in a position to more speedily process applications, sir. I'm not going to come here, sir, before this Parliament, and I spoke a bit about it last month as well in, I think, the first debate on the Immigration Amendment Act, that we have to find a way, and we are in the process of finding a way to speed up immigration in terms of processing of the various applications, sir. It can be done. Once the will is there, sir, it can be done and it will be done. Immigration, sir, and I praise them again, would have been part of the process of validating and giving effect to about 1,500 or 1,500 plus Ross University students and lecturers and other employees coming into Barbados, getting their visas, the student visas and work permits, etc., in a very short space of time, sir. It's miraculous. Many government departments came on deck to ensure that Ross University, which, as we have been hearing, will be, I think, what, 3% of our GDP or something, $65 million annually, US, I believe, into the economy of Barbados. And immigration did its part in a short space of time in processing and completing and authorizing visas for these 1,500 plus students and even more officials and professors, etc., at the university. And that shows you, sir, that it can be done. We know, sir, as I said, that it takes too long, and we're freeing up of some immigration officials, sir, and with the processes that we are going through, with the help of the Ministry of Innovation, Science and Smart Technology, as I said, ably led by the honourable member in Cabinet Minister in the other place. We're working on improving these systems. They have to be improved, sir. And I pointed out very recently, sir, that there is a case. I pointed out to the officials recently that there is a case, sir. It is not binding on the Barbados judicial situation, but I would contend that it is of persuasive authority. Case coming out of Antigua, judgment given in August 2016, Oliveira against the Attorney General of Antigua, where the Privy Council, it went to what is still, of course, the highest court for Antigua. Unfortunately, sir, and really and truly, we have to address this, sir, But as we know, the people of Antigua, and we have to, of course, the Antiguan government has to accept their verdict on the same day as the people of Grenada rejected the accession of their respective countries into the Caribbean Court of Justice. So the Privy Council still remains the highest court of Antigua and the OECS countries, with the exception of Dominica. But being a judgment of the Privy Council, sir, and Privy Council, as we all know, was at one time our highest court, I would want to suggest that this is still of persuasive authority, even though not binding on the Barbados authorities. But in this case, an individual who was married to an Antiguan citizen applied under constitutional provisions similar, sir, to those in our constitution for citizenship of the country. Because the Antiguan constitution says that a person who is married to a citizen of Antigua shall be entitled to citizenship of Antigua once they are not living apart from their spouse under a decree of a competent court or a deed of separation. They can't get citizenship, sir, and in under 3 years, because the constitutional provision says that the marriage has to subsist for upwards of 3 years. And in fact, sir, the only difference is that our constitution prescribes a period, doesn't set a date, and that period by policy, sir, is at present 3 years, sir. It will soon be before cabinet, sir, because as I said in the previous debates last month, we're working assiduously on immigration reform, sir, and it will soon be before cabinet to decide whether that 3-year period is too long a period for someone who is married to a Barbadian to have to wait for citizenship. What I mean, sir, you're married, sir. You got 1 or 2 children, you got a mortgage, you have 2 cats and a dog. I mean, sir, that is a genuine marriage, sir. I mean, we live in the real world. Well, there's nothing sham about that. That immigration should still be waiting 7 years to see whether it's a real marriage or not, sir. Why married 28 years now, the next month? So I understand what marriage is, sir. But that is a real marriage. What you're telling me, after 7 years, you're still looking to see whether it's a sham marriage or not. And this is Barbados, sir, where everybody know everybody. Somebody who marries somebody, a Barbadian citizen, to get Barbados citizenship, you're going to know in a year or 2 that they're looking to trick the system. But don't let's know delay and hinder the progress and quality of life of an individual who in a real marriage, sir, they got commitments, 2 children, mortgage, house, 2 cats and 3 dogs. So let's get real, sir. Let's get real. So the Privy Council, sir, in that case, because the Antiguan authorities, sir, played the fool, sir, and the person applied for citizenship and 2 years and all kind of thing afterwards, they gave the person an appointment to come in and see the officials over a year after the apply. And the Privy Council said that is unreasonable. I mean, you can't. The Constitution, the primary law of a country, determines that an individual is entitled to citizenship if they're married to an Antiguan after 3 years. And you can't be fooling around. The Privy Council told the Antiguan authorities, saying that you delaying giving them appointment. You put the appointment date to interview them over a year afterwards, and even then when you interview them you still don't get them citizenship. And the Privy Council found that the individual who applied for citizenship, the applicant, had been damaged, their constitutional rights had been breached, and that they were entitled to damages, sir. And quite frankly, my view would be that if such a case were to come to the Caribbean Court of Justice arising from Barbados, where after 7 years an individual who has applied for citizenship on the basis of marriage has not got that citizenship, the Caribbean Court of Justice may very well be minded to do the same against the government of Barbados, and the government paying out money, again, just like how they had to do in Sanique Myrie case. So I know about that, sir, as long as I happen to be Minister of Immigration, sir. And therefore, we are in the process of getting a customer charter service, a customer charter of services by the Immigration Department, sir. As I said, as we get everything in place in terms of the technology to assist the Immigration Department, sir. But we're not waiting till then. We're moving towards this now, while we speak, that citizenship applications by Barbadians, sir, by descent. Let's take an example, sir. And you're either entitled to citizenship by descent or not, sir. In other words, your father or mother or both either born in Barbados or not, right? You have a birth certificate. Your birth certificate has on the name of your parents. We know, sir, that, and this was very unfortunate, but it was reality that in all previous times, I mean, birth certificates, and I used to almost want to cry, had the name of mother, but no name of father, blank, like if you're only born by your mother, and we men didn't have any process in conception or birth. But the reality, sir, your citizenship by descent, that should cause no problem, sir. So citizenship by descent should not take a few months to determine whether the application should be approved or not. And we have to move towards 7 working days for that, sir. There may be some cases, sir, and I think that the Immigration Department now understands, sir, that they have to abide by the law, as all government departments. And you know, sir, I mean, we're aware of this. You know, some government departments sometimes give themselves more power than they have. We experienced that in the last administration by the Barbados Revenue Authority, where we had to fight them as a political party, sir, and the Bar Association came on board too. That at that time, I believe it was in 2014 or 2014, I believe it was, when that authority sought to tell you that you couldn't get a land tax certificate, which, as you know, sir, you require if you're selling property, that you couldn't get a land tax certificate unless you had paid up all your income taxes and your VAT and everything else. There was no legislative authority for that at that time, sir. They were acting, the Barbados Revenue Authority was acting ultra vires administrative law, sir. So our government departments have to understand that the law is the law, sir, and the law is made in these hallowed chambers, sir, as interpreted by the courts of Barbados, ending with the Caribbean Court of Justice. And therefore, if the Status of Children Act, sir, says that a man accepts that he is father of a child, and he swears an affidavit, as you know, sir, to say, I am the father of this child, or a court subsequently declares that he is the father of the child, or he goes and then, even though his name is not on the birth certificate initially, sir, subsequently he goes to the registry and says, Registrar, I am the father of this child. Put my name on the birth certificate, sir. The Status of Children Act 1979, one of the revolutionary social pieces of legislation passed in these chambers under the political administration of the late Right Honourable Tom Adams, sir, determines that the man is father of the child, well, he's by his own admission. So therefore, while an application by descent might be slightly held up because now you're verifying now that the birth certificate has been altered and now has the name on it, or that there's the court degree, or you might tell the person to bring the affidavit that you swear before the JP or the notary public to show that you are father. It can't take too much more than 7 working days. And of course, this is where all the documentation is in, sir. It's not that you're bringing in the documentation piecemeal. 7 working days after the immigration has all the documentation. Citizenship by marriage, sir. As I said, though, taking too long in most cases, sir. The aim is to move the processing of a citizenship by application once this prescribed period is passed, and once all the documentation is in, your marriage certificate, your birth certificate, whatever else, within 4 weeks, sir. There's no reason why it should take so long. So all of this has to do with ease of doing business, because if somebody's status is not secure, the mind not fully settled, the on reside and work, they can't get promotion in the job probably because the status not secure. Some jobs maybe you might not even be able to be eligible for, sir. So all of this is part of what we have to do and lead as a country in getting matters in place, sir. Student visas, right now, I believe we commit to getting them in 7 working days. First time, sir. First time applications. Again, this is important, sir, because someone working in Barbados, they have their work permits, they're here legitimately. They need to be secure that their children know, or their child, is properly in place in the school. When the September comes, that school starting. So we can't be fooling around now on a student application visa, sir, which is so fundamental to the existence of an individual or family that is working here with permission. Work permits, sir, again, an issue. As of now, the Immigration Department tries to process and complete them. Once, as I said, everything is in place, all the documentation and information within in a month, sir, and that will remain as is. Entry visas, sir. There are some countries, too many countries, I think we accept, sir, that Barbados requires citizens of to still have visas to enter Barbados, and we are a tourist country, sir, so I know it is on the radar at the relevant authorities level to relook at that aspect of the number of countries that we require entry visas for. And right now, I believe it is 7 working days. We need to reduce that, sir, to 3 days, 72 hours. So these are all aspects that the Immigration Department is working on and that we have to improve, sir. There will be no excuses for not improving permanent residence, sir, where I think right now the process might take 6 months. Sometimes more. We aim to bring that down to 4 weeks. As I said, we have to use the technology. There's still some ironing out of it in terms of digitalization. We all know that government is that this is a work in progress, the digitalization of government departments, but we will get there, sir, because all of this is part of the competitiveness of Barbados, and where we found ourselves in May last year on coming into office at number 133 out of 170 countries in the world in terms of ease of doing business. Now, in other words, in terms of difficulty of doing business, there were only 37 countries in the world that had been judged that it was more difficult to do business in Barbados. I mean, whether it was getting a permit for electricity or permission to build construction, to build a house or building infrastructure. I think it was taking 14 months on average for that. And of course, we brought legislation in here last week that will lessen that time period tremendously. But it can't be so difficult to do business in a country that seeks to be on the cutting edge of economic and social development, and to again punch above its weight in this world, and again become the leading developed country in the world, sir, and again aim for developed country status as we were doing the last time the Barbados Labour Party was in office. So these are initiatives that the Immigration Department is actively working on, sir. The legislation that we have brought today, as I said, would require some ironing out. It would most likely require some service agreements between immigration, customs, JRCC, maybe. Sorry, not JRCC, sir. We already have that. The Grantley Adams Airport, of course, where the kiosks are installed, and the relevant authorities will look at that assiduously. We have ensured that the JRCC will supply to the tourism stakeholders information which they require to be able for them to plan and market their tourist strategies. Because that tourism, I believe, uses, well, not I believe, I know, uses information from the present ED forms, to compile information on tourism, obviously how many tourists come to Barbados every year, and maybe the average length of stay of a tourist from Europe as compared to Germany, as compared to Canada. This information, sir, as I said, would be accessible from JRCC and from the kiosks as well. And it is contained in the PNR, which is part of the APIS, which was given legislative effect last month. But it may very well have to be, again, sir, that some kind of memorandum of understanding may have to be formally put in place between the Ministry of Tourism and the JRCC, for the full and free flow without any difficulty whatsoever of this kind of information. So, sir, this process, as I said, this legislative initiative is part of the thrust of this administration to ease the process of doing business, whether by residents or tourists, with government authorities across our island, sir. And this is what you will find, or the public of Barbados and the wider world will find, that this government is about. Easing business, making life easier, improving the quality of life for our people and for the people who visit our shores and for the people beyond who have contact with Barbados. Running a government, sir, that is not corrupt, sir. Very important, sir. And hence we look forward again to the integrity legislation soon coming before Parliament again out of the Select Committee, as the Attorney General, the Honourable Member for St. Joseph, has said it would within the next few months. Being transparent, accountable, to the people of this country by whose will and sufferance we are here in this Parliament, sir, and by running a caring government, unlike the callousness of the last administration, of running a competent government, a government, sir, that is 24/7 working in the interest and in the advancement of the people of this country. I'm obliged to you, sir. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I rise to make a contribution to this very important piece of legislation, this amendment this morning. In doing so, let me first thank or congratulate the Honourable Member for St. James North, Minister of Home Affairs, and his team for having sat for a period of time and looked at what was happening in Barbados. As you heard the Honourable Members refer to, that both administrations at one point in time were actually pushed back in relation to this kind of legislation and what is happening at one of our main ports of entry, the airport. This is a step in the right direction, and it is there for all to see that this new administration is serious about the modernization of various processes in this country, and then making life a lot easier, making the ease of doing business, improving on the ease of doing business in this country. Now, we all know, and a number of us would have traveled from time to time, some perhaps more than others, that having made a long trip and on arriving home, we want to get out of the airport, we want to get to our destination and get some rest. And similarly, that is the desire, I believe, Mr. Speaker, of a lot of tourists and business people who may come to this country. What is important as we look at what is before us this morning, and we have heard the Honourable Member in his speech outline a number of benefits that this amendment would bring to the process at our port of entry, our main port of entry, the airport. With the introduction of these kiosks, we know that it provides for the processing of 4 times the amount of travelers per immigration officer, and that can be very, very significant, Mr. Speaker. I have had the opportunity to travel, and I have also been at the airport on times, and we could accommodate 4, 5, 6 jets at our airport at any given point in time, with a number of passengers arriving. And one of the things, I don't know if anyone ever paid attention to it, but they used to pay attention to the fact that once the plane has landed, and sometimes you're not even fasten the seatbelt sign is not even off, before persons are up, Mr. Speaker, ready to take out their luggage from the overhead compartments and stand in line quickly to get to the door to get off that plane, to make sure that they get into the arrivals halls early so that they are processed early, because the long and short of it, you want to get out of the airport and get to your destination quickly so that you can perhaps rest or go and conduct the business that you want to conduct. Now, the fact that the introduction of the use of these kiosks would provide for the processing of 4 times the amount of travelers per immigration officer. That is very, very significant, and that would indeed improve the speed at which persons can be in and out of our arrivals hall and just waiting for their luggage to be searched by the customs in the customs area. Mr. Speaker, sir, it is important for us as a tourist destination, and I made this point because that is where at this point in time, the most of our monies come, and we want persons, whether they're international tourists or regional tourists for that matter, to have a very pleasing experience when they come to our shores. And one of the first areas of contact, as a matter of fact, the places they will be would obviously be at our airport and also at the seaport, but we're focusing on what happens at Grantley Adams International Airport at this point in time. We want to improve our visitor experience, and this amendment would add immediately, Mr. Speaker, sir, to that particular experience and improve that experience. Now, in addition, we also see, Mr. Speaker, sir, where in this legislation the immigration officers would be freed up to pay some more attention to other critical aspects of our security. And this is important in a time where we have across the world, border security is important. We have, in terms of, we have the potential where the terrorist element may raise his head. This piece of legislation, this amendment, Mr. Speaker, sir, gives us the opportunity, based on information that would be submitted to us prior to planes landing in Barbados. This amendment as well gives us the opportunity to be able to identify such persons based on what we have before us, Mr. Speaker. And so, not only for the arriving passengers, though, for the departing persons as well, because we have a situation, Mr. Speaker, where the use of what we call the ED card, where you have to be filling it out and so on, and being processed by an immigration officer before you leave the country, that too is something that will be a thing of the past. That would be a thing of the past, because we want to be able to persons to be traveling in and out of Barbados with as little hassle, I would call it, Mr. Speaker, with as little hassle as possible. And this government has indicated earlier, even during the course of our campaign, that we intend to make significant improvements in many different areas and use the technology that there is available to us in order to make the lives or improve the ease of doing business within this country. I have the opportunity to serve in a ministry where we have a number of situations, Mr. Speaker, and at what we call in the Pine, at the licensing authority, where renewal of licenses and payment for licenses and doing and drivers tests and all of that has been. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure that you would have experienced a little bit of what I would call trauma there a few weeks ago. Another of our colleagues was there as well, and the country is crying out. The country is crying out for the government to make significant changes whereby persons can stand in the comfort of their living rooms and do certain transactions online. And in the Ministry of Transport, Works and Maintenance, that is our pursuit. We aren't there as yet, but we will get there, because persons want to be able or want to know that they can utilize their time, they can do their business and make maximum use of the time available to them to conduct meaningful business, rather than be slowed down by very poor systems that we have in place. And we in the Ministry of Transport, Works and Maintenance, we are moving in that direction, where persons, if in terms of your licenses, your regulation tests, your persons coming in and want to have, because if we're making this improvement at the airport where you can get through and you can do business quickly, but then there are persons that now would come to the licensing authority who want to apply for a permit to drive away there on the island. So we cannot have this. Would drive us, really, this would drive us to push a little harder to remove the wait in lines. The wait in lines there, where a person would have to come and that are applying for a permit to drive on the roads in the island, having to wait a long time in a line in order to have that process completed. And so we see the immigration, the Ministry of Home Affairs is leading the way in this in relation to the immigration to this amendment, and it also tells us at the ministry, and I'm sure certainly other ministries, as a matter of fact, when we have our honourable leader has included in the cabinet a ministry of innovation and smart technology, where we have come to the time in this country that we have to make full use. We must make full use of the technology that there is available to us, and we want Barbadians to know that we are working on this. It is a work in progress. It is not something that will happen overnight. There are many areas that you have to consider, many aspects of the process that you have to consider, and even in that you have to make sure that the security is tight, because everybody wants to make payments online and so on, which is good and which is the intention. But in doing all that, we have to make sure that all the systems are in place. And with this act, I am sure this would have gone through several processes, several reviews, and even went through a pilot project to ensure that it is working the way we want it to work. And the truth is that with the introduction of any new system, there are always, more often than not, some teething problems. And we want persons to bear with us and to actually share as well, comments on the experience. And I trust that the honourable minister would have something in place at the airport where persons can offer or leave their comments on their experience with use of the kiosks. By the way, right? Kiosks. right, where persons can leave their comments and share their experience so that it can be, if something needs to be tweaked, if something needs to be corrected, it can be corrected and improved to the maximum. That is where we want our country to be. We must be at the cutting edge where technology is concerned and where the use of technology is concerned in all areas, not just at the airport or at the seaport, but in all areas across the business arena within this country. Mr. Speaker, sir, we have had situations before, I believe, where persons might have had bad experiences and perhaps might have been ignored. We cannot afford in this country, we cannot afford for persons visiting, and both on the international, from international countries and in the region as well, to give us negative publicity. Now, the Immigration Department is a very, very important department in this country. I heard the Honorable Minister refer to things like work permits, the processing for persons who may be applying for immigrant status, what they call, something you call reside and work and so on. And people have complained on more than one occasion about the length of time that they have had to wait, especially in the areas of work permits, to get a response. Now, it is important that in this area, even though you may have to wait, it is important that all the necessary checks and balances and everything that has to be done is done properly, because you do not want to bring in the criminal factor within your country. You don't want to let in what I would say the criminal element unawares. But we must do all that we can. We must do all that we can to encourage persons to come to this country and to make a meaningful contribution within the specified or the specific time allowed, so that Barbados at the end of the day, because we can only benefit, this country can only benefit in this regard. And what we want, Mr. Speaker, to see is that in the area of work permits, we get some improvement in there. And if based on what the Honorable Minister said, in terms of the processing period being a month, I think that is very good, and it must be commended. Once we can keep that up as much as we possibly can, the officers at the Immigration Department must be commended for such an improvement. And again, it points to what this government is interested in pushing Barbados forward and opening that welcoming arm to people. Because at this stage of our development, when we have been pegged back by the last decade, we have been pegged back by the last decade. And it is important at this point in time that we do everything that we possibly can to encourage persons to come here, to make their contribution, to enjoy Barbados, so that Barbados can, because we need this country back on a growth path as quickly as possible, Mr. Speaker, sir. And therefore, the government has signaled clearly what its intention is. We have signaled that clearly what our intention is, and we are not only talking about it, but we are putting the various measures in place in order to facilitate persons coming to this country. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, people must understand that nonetheless that when you come to a country has laws, a country has structure, and so on. The laws must be followed, the structure that there is must be complied with if you're going to make a contribution. Because if you go outside the four corners of the law and you operate, well, then you have to be mindful, or you have to accept, Mr. Speaker, sir, that which you will get at the end of the day. That is the point. We will do all that we can to accommodate, but at the end of the day, there is a contribution that must also come. There's a role to be played by the persons coming into this country as well, because you have your part to play. We will facilitate as much as we possibly can, but you must also do your part while you are here in this country, Mr. Speaker, sir. This legislation, as I close my contribution, Mr. Speaker, sir, is forward. Thinking this amendment, it is a step in the right direction, Mr. Speaker, sir. I want to again commend the Ministry of Home Affairs, the Immigration Department, the Minister himself for the input that was made in this, the Ministry of Tourism and International Transport as well, who would have, Mr. Speaker, sir, who would have made their input in order to get this legislation, this amendment right for the benefit of Barbadians, for the benefit of our traveling Caribbean brothers and sisters, and for the benefit of the international community. Mr. Speaker, I support this amendment, and I'm obliged to you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. I rise, Mr. Speaker, to give my brief contribution in support of the Honourable Member of Parliament for St. James North, the Minister of Home Affairs. Mr. Speaker, the matter for consideration is really for us as a country to make provisions for the automated passport, the kiosks at the Grand Islands International Airport. And Mr. Speaker, I want to commend the Right Honourable Minister for moving with promptitude to ensure that we as a country, that we are not only fit for a purpose, but that we can ensure that, as it stands, the ease of doing business in this country, which is about, as we recognize in terms of the amount of countries, we are at 130 out of 190 countries. And I'm saying that the Member of Parliament, the Honourable Minister of Home Affairs, that this bill will ensure that the ease of doing business in this country, that the ease is realized. And Mr. Speaker, it also speaks to the fact that we now have to get with the times. And when you travel to other countries and you see the systems that are put in place, which provide the wherewithal so that the immigration department can function to full effect. And it's unfortunate, Mr. Speaker, that in 2017, the idea of the kiosk was proposed by the last government. I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, like the true oxymoron, they have moved forward in reverse. And this is not abnormal as it relates to their behavior in the last decade. Mr. Speaker, security is not a product. Security is a process. And I am saying the Right Honourable Member for St. James North has started the process. The process to ensure that our boundaries, that the ease of doing business at our boundaries and the security is maintained. And I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, I am happy to be sitting in this and standing in this August chamber along with persons like the Minister of Home Affairs and other members to ensure that the interests of Barbadians, that the interest is protected, and that our country can punch above its weight. And Mr. Speaker, what these kiosks seek to do, and the advantages are far, Mr. Speaker, and I'm happy to say that we have to use the technology that is available to us. And some of the advantages, Mr. Speaker, is that the kiosks provide for the processing of 4 times the amount of travelers per immigration officer. Now that is a breakthrough moment. I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, that it provides for an 89% faster process for eligible travelers compared to the typical immigration inspection processes. And Mr. Speaker, it requires 50% less operational space and is completely free and does not require pre-registration. Mr. Speaker, it therefore allows the JIA to increase international arrival traffic and reduce wait times. And it frees immigration officers from routine administration so that they can concentrate on more effective tasks and on critical areas as it relates to protection of boundaries. Mr. Speaker, these are things that we can be proud of as a government of the day. Because, Mr. Speaker, it is important that we not only govern, but that we protect not only our people, but our boundaries. And I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, that the issue with the entrance of firearms in this country is a serious issue. And I'm saying, the Attorney General, he have spoken on the issue on more than one occasion. Guns, they drop out the sky. It's not a Chicken Little episode. It's not kindergarten behavior. A Glock 36, a Glock 17, a rifle is certainly not an air crime. It is not an air crime. And I'm saying it had to come from somewhere. And it's important in this day and age that we protect our boundaries and safeguard this country, this little Barbados, a country. And I'm saying to the youngsters there, I'm demanding, actually, Mr. Speaker, that they put down the guns. We are not saying don't only put down the guns, we are saying put down the guns or else. We have a duty as policymakers to ensure that Barbadians are allowed to walk around this country in a fearless manner. In a manner where they think that their lives are not being threatened. And we are going to ensure...
I remember.
Yes, please.
It is not normal for I to intervene at this time, but...
Yes, please.
Please remember the subject matter...
Of course.
...of the debate rests, the core element, the rubric of the debate rests with the immigration, the amendment to the Immigration Act, that aspect of it.
Okay.
Rather to the implementation of the kiosks at GIA, etc. I would therefore want to, not warn you, but ask you to take that into consideration as you speak on the debate.
Okay.
And to stick within those parameters as closely as you can so as not to veer off and take the debate out of the context within which we will seek to have this here debated.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Security, Mr. Speaker, is ultimately important. And I am saying that the immigration department, who is charged with ensuring that these boundaries are secure, I am saying that the change and the amendment, Mr. Speaker, and the fact that kiosk becomes a part of the process, because I did say that security is not a product, it is a process. I am saying that the immigration department and indeed the customs agencies at our boundaries will have the time to ensure and to look at other things that are responsible for the security. And Mr. Speaker, These machines are connected to our joint regional communication center. It's able to identify any abnormalities where the information will be put into a central unit. And I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, what we are seeking to do as a country is a breakthrough moment. A moment, Mr. Speaker, that all Barbadians can be proud. We can feel safe at our boundaries, Mr. Speaker. And we are happy that this government and the Minister of Home Affairs, that he have moved with alacrity to ensure that our boundaries are protected and that the ease of doing business at the airport, Mr. Speaker, that is realized through the introduction of this kiosk. Mr. Speaker, it is very important that we in the technological age, that we use all the available mechanisms, all that is available in this technological age, to ensure that we move with a measure of promptitude as it relates to doing business. It's no secret that there's a lot of complaints from tourists. Mr. Speaker, tourism is our business. We need to play our part. And we are saying that we will play our part as a government by leading the charge, by easing the time it takes for persons, tourists, persons from the region, even Barbadians, the time it takes to be processed at the airport. And Mr. Speaker, to this end, I want to congratulate the Minister of Home Affairs and this government, because these are things that should have been done over the last decade. It makes one wonder what was happening during the last 10 years. Because this is something, the introduction of kiosks at the airport is something that certainly should have been realized over the last 10 years. And, Mr. Speaker, I am happy that the Member of Parliament for St. James North, that he has put his hand to the plow to ensure that this very important venture is undertaken. And Mr. Speaker, because they said it was going to be a very short intervention, I want to lead and close in the words of Nelson Mandela, when he says that safety and security, Mr. Speaker, it just don't happen. It is a result of collective consensus and public investment, Mr. Speaker. We owe our nation, Mr. Speaker, and children, who we consider the most vulnerable in our society, a life free of violence, abuse, and free of international fear. Mr. Speaker, I'm obliged. Thank you.
Honourable Member St. Michael South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, sir. Like every other speaker before me, Mr. Speaker, I intend to be very brief. I raise to support the amendment on this Immigration Act that would allow us to utilize the kiosks as well as to replace the ED forms. And while this is an administrative issue, I also acknowledge, Mr. Speaker, sir, that the conversation that surrounds immigration is in many ways philosophical. And I had a conversation, Mr. Speaker, sir, with a young man who told me that the government was now in a hurry to change the rules to allow all kinds of people into Barbados. And that is how he perceives our adjustment, this amendment that we're making, and our capacity to be able now, in a digital world, to try to fast-track people. For any of us who've traveled now, we would know that almost anywhere in the world you go, you now have to utilize those kiosks. Hey, it is no standard. It is not the intention of the government to put in place anything to allow people to come without being checked and without balances, but that is not the nature of what we're doing. That is not even how the kiosks work. When I'm going to the US, I, like anybody else, have to put my hand in the machine. I have to automatically fill out the form, the same questions on the machine before me. It is, on one hand, you're doing it on paper, and on the other hand, you're doing it on the machine. But this young man was so adamant that we were trying to do something to be able to ease people in to Barbados. And Mr. Speaker, sir, I feel that stems not from the administrative adjustment that we are making, but a deeper philosophical and perhaps ideological lack of understanding as to why we're doing this and to why immigration matters. If anybody understands the Barbadian story is an immigrant story. I mean, my grandmother moved to the U.S. before I was even born, and she spent her entire life working there. She recently died there, God bless her soul. But the Panama Canal, I mean, if you understand too what happened, I mean, most immigration amendments now, if you look at immigration amendments, Mr. Speaker, sir, and you're an attorney and a distinguished one, so I know you know, over the course of time, almost all amendments to immigration acts are done to keep people out. Every year there's an additional amendment to stop people from being able to go to countries. But people don't just travel for so. Most of us, when we travel, a lot of people travel some cases to escape poverty or to be reunited with their family. But people travel for a reason. We have these fears, Mr. Speaker, sir, this idea that we're putting in place these kiosks so anybody could come amuses me, Mr. Speaker, sir. And all these immigration amendments that you see, when you look at what's happening in the UK, what's happening in the US, over time, more and more restrictions preventing people from being able to travel. I recall, though, that after the Second World War in the UK, the amendments that were done weren't done to prevent people because they were desperate for people. They made amendments to encourage people to come. Believe it or not, Mr. Speaker, sir, in fact, I'm sure you know, that in the recent past, I think it was last year, those same people who went to the UK, when they were invited to the UK, when Commonwealth citizens were invited to the UK in the 50s and the 60s, those same people who are older now and seeking a pension are being called illegal immigrants and find themselves without jobs, find themselves without a pension, Mr. Speaker, sir. Because of this fear of people who have gone to immigrate. And it was a Barbadian, I believe, who also led the fight against the system and asked them to check themselves, because that is not how Barbadians operate. So what is good for the goose, I believe, must be good for the gander. And that if Barbadians want to benefit from people, from our capacity to go to other people's countries, then we must allow people to come to this country too. The chief immigration officer who is here would tell you that almost every week I write a letter to that department. Every week. When I have my constituency clinics on Wednesdays, invariably there is somebody in my constituency who may have been living in Barbados for several years, or married to a Barbadian, or whose children, who are now almost adults, have been here since they were 2. And still struggling to get immigration status. The chief immigration officer would tell you that I write almost every week. He would also tell you that he never responds to me. But in all fairness to the chief, he acts. He does not respond to me, but he acts. And that is the truth. But he would tell you that I write. And Mr. Speaker, sir, there is one case in particular that I recently rewrote him on. Can I call one name very quickly?
It's not permitted, sir.
Okay, well, but you will know. But there's one person in particular that I've just recently rewritten the chief on, asking him to consider this case because, Mr. Speaker, sir, this is a young lady who went to school here. Her mother is...
I remember that's why they have attorneys at law for, sir. Not for members who are not au fait with the law, sir.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I may have to, Mr. Speaker, sir, engage a person in another capacity to pursue this case for me. But I'm just saying, Mr. Speaker, sir, that the issues pertaining to immigration, they're complex. Issues pertaining to immigration are rooted in something that is deep. And it is rooted in something, Mr. Speaker, sir, that is philosophical. And I mean, there are pros and cons to having these machines. Of course there are. But there are pros and cons around immigration, period. In fact, there are very few issues, I think, as polarizing as immigration is to many people. Very few. And there are very few people who find themselves in the middle. People often say they support it or that they don't. And the same thing with these kiosks. People either say they will support them or that they don't. And Mr. Speaker, sir, we have come to a point in Barbados where we recognize that we have to do things differently. And we ask ourselves as a party and as a government, who fundamentally are we? And what it is that we stand for at the end of the day. And when we're talking about creating these new industries, and when we're talking about being an innovative government, and when we are talking about being a digital government, and when we are talking, because still in the Barbados Labour Party's constitution is still reference to the idea that we must have regionalism and a commitment to our brothers and sisters. And the truth is, for most Barbadians, when we speak about immigration, the challenge we're having with people being able to come fast, and it is not really that they're questioning other people. We're questioning ourselves. We're questioning the Guyanese. We're questioning the Vincentians and the St. Lucians. And in some cases, we're questioning now the Africans and the Asians. But we're not questioning people's capacity to come. We're questioning our own capacity as a people for the most part. So we're questioning whether people should be allowed to come as quickly as they can through the airport, because we want to monitor the regional people and people in many cases of African descent who are coming to this country. And using the kiosks now as some manifestation, some tool, Mr. Speaker, sir, to be able to prevent people from coming to this country. I have never been of the view, Mr. Speaker, sir, that people come to this country more to take than they do to give. In fact, Mr. Speaker, sir, if you look at the statistics, and most of the work done by immigrants, a lot of it is that kind of casual work that you would never find measured in our formal GDP. A lot of it is not captured anyway. A lot of it is contributions to the informal sector that you will never see measured in our GDP. But even if you capture the formal contribution to our GDP, you will see that in many cases immigrants are doing a lot of work. If you look at the fears people have about the immigrants and the crime they bring, if you look at the prison records, in many cases our prisons aren't populated by these immigrants. As a percentage, I'm pretty sure it is the percentage who are here as a percentage of the population in prison is lower. And that these are fears are fueled by a xenophobia that in many cases we inherited because of the way we perceive ourselves as a people. We fear our own selves, Mr. Speaker, sir. And so I write to the chief weekly. And I say to him, Mr. Speaker, sir, in my capacity as a member of Parliament for the great constituency of St. Michael South, please consider this case because I do not think it is fair. And I know I'm advised by you, Mr. Speaker, sir, that perhaps I need to engage somebody else in some cases to get some resolution to some of these matters. Because, Mr. Speaker, sir, it is not fair. I read this book recently, and I spend, when I have time, Mr. Speaker, so I like to read, as you know. And I read this book recently. It is called These Truths by Jill Lepore. And she argues that many nationalists, because, you know, we like to think of ourselves as being committed to our country, is the same issue that the president of a great country has. He's a nationalist, you know. This idea that everybody else who comes is a danger to the country. And they look back to a time of this glorious past. My grandmother did not leave Barbados to go to the US because Barbados was the best place and all the economic opportunities were here. But she left to go to the US in pursuit of opportunity. And so nationalists often look back to this glorious past, and in These Truths she says, nationalists who had few proposals for the future gain power by telling fables about the greatness of the past. don't have any great contribution to think about the future. We are thinking about the future and where it is we want to take Barbados as a country. Barbados has to redefine itself. We have to say to the world, we are back, and that we mean business. And that being open to business means that you don't have long queues at the airport. And it means that when people come and they use the kiosks here, they don't then have to go to immigration officers because you're doing the work twice. And that why you want to do the work twice, because you don't trust the same system that you created, and because of your innate fears of people who look just like you, Mr. Speaker, sir. And that is why I say that there are deeper philosophical questions about why it is that people are not allowed to travel. And that all these things that, in my mind, are very prohibitive stem from this fear. And, you know, the Windrush scandal, I think that's what it was called, the scandal in the UK, the Windrush scandal, tells me, Mr. Speaker, that at the end of the day, our fear is rooted in something that is way bigger than whether we have kiosks at the airport or not. I have to tell you that as minister responsible for the port, we will soon be having some in the port too. And that the reality is that that is the best way now in a modern era to do things. It is the way to do business. So that when you come through the seaport, you now have to be able to do the same thing with the kiosks. It makes sense, Mr. Speaker, sir. And it is the only thing that would not make sense is if the system was so corrupted that we allow people to come through without checks and balances. And Mr. Speaker, sir, that is not the case. And so I heard the Honourable Member for Christchurch West Central as he made his contribution, Mr. Speaker, sir. Because we are implementing the same kiosks at the port, we are doing so cognizant that we have to also improve security at the port. It is not a measure to lower the security at the port. In fact, it is a measure to increase the security at the port, at the seaport. And that we do not feel implementing the kiosks is going to make life easier for people who want to do things that are nefarious in this country. In fact, we feel the opposite is true. And so, Mr. Speaker, sir, there is this, what they call an emerging kind of barricaded nationalism. You want to surround yourself by the fact that I am Barbadian, and because I'm Barbadian, nobody can come to this country but Barbadians. And we had a conversation in here very recently about the fact that we do not have in Barbados enough people to do a lot of the jobs that are needed to be done in Barbados, but that do not necessarily have to be done by Barbadians. And when the Honourable Member for St. Michael South Central spoke, she spoke of the dependency ratio, and that is the contribution of people who are working against those who are not working. And we have, our dependency ratio now is getting more and more jeopardized because we have fewer people working and more and more people not working, and somebody has to be able to finance that. And so in many cases, we may be requiring other people to come to Barbados and do the work. But we are very serious about security at the port, Mr. Speaker, sir. And the kiosks would not lower security at the port. And we do not intend to keep out the innocent. We intend to capture the guilty. And so that is why we are talking about new scanners at the port. And that is why we are talking about kiosks at the port, Mr. Speaker, sir. And before I close, Mr. Speaker, I went to the enthronement ceremony yesterday for the new bishop. You know, and Mr. Speaker, sir, I'm a God-fearing man, Mr. Speaker, sir. I grew up in the Anglican Church. And I must tell you that as the new bishop spoke, I felt a call in my soul to come home to my church. Because he spoke to me as somebody who fully understands that this is a new Barbados. And that what will come to define us now, sir, is how we respond to what is happening in this new Barbados, Mr. Speaker, sir. And so as I listened to him yesterday, I was filled with a sense of hope, and I will tell you why. Mr. Speaker, sir, the new bishop, Maxwell, can I say that? The new bishop, sir, while he spoke, he said that it was his intention to make a contribution to the social issues of this country, and to give guidance to both the political and moral issues of our society, and to speak on the social issues of our society. I believe, Mr. Speaker, sir, that the faith-based community now is presented with an opportunity to lead on a matter that traditionally is so divisive, this issue of immigration. And in a way that they are uniquely positioned to do so. Because in a way, they can speak to a matter that traditionally polarizes people in a way that brings people together. Driven not by fear, driven not by the need to estrange people from essentially who they are, sir, but driven by the idea that Barbados, as a God-fearing nation, does not have to fear people coming into this country. Mr. Speaker, sir, I listened to the new bishop, and I believe that as he spoke, Mr. Speaker, sir, that I can see the church now having a role to play in all of our issues on this immigration issue. Because the church must take leadership, and that the church, like the kiosks and like us as a government trying to be transformative and trying to be new, must bring a newness to this existing situation. And that is how I see the role for the new bishop, Mr. Speaker, sir, and he gets my full support based on the conversation that he shared yesterday in relation to how we must move this country forward. But I also believe, Mr. Speaker, sir, that as we speak to this immigration issue, the Honourable Member for St. Michael South Central uses her C's, care, commitment and courage. And I feel that as we talk about immigration, there has to be consultation, cooperation and coordination. And that essentially we cannot talk about closing borders anymore. We cannot talk about making it difficult for people to come to Barbados anymore. Because the world is now a global village. People will come. And people have to be accommodated. And the question is, Mr. Speaker, sir, do we wish to hold firm to a belief and a position that has changed over time? Or do we wish to commit ourselves to something that will not serve us in a new Barbados? Do we wish to make it difficult for people to come through the airport so that lines go all the way back onto the tarmac? Or do we want to get people through as quickly as possible so that we can bring more people here, so that we can contribute to the development of this country? Because essentially that's what we are saying. We want to make Barbados the best place to come and to do business. And so, Mr. Speaker, sir, as I close, this is really a question about our identity as a people. That is how I view this immigration debate. That is how I view this fear of chaos and people not being able, people coming in, too many people coming, and this is how I see immigration generally. Who are we as a people? And why are we so petrified? Why are we so petrified of people who look like us? Mr. Speaker, sir. And that we are so challenged by the idea that we must expedite people, that you could have all kinds of things being put in, unnecessary obstacles that you have to leap over to do something that we have to do. All the other countries in the world are doing it. Barbados in the last 10 years has fallen behind on almost every aspect of development. And I said before, Mr. Speaker, sir, as I close, the greatest harm that was done to this country is not the economic harm in the last 10 years. But this idea that Barbadians have lost faith in themselves because we now think that we cannot do the things that are rudimentary, simple things that Barbados would have been able to do years ago. So the greatest harm that was done to this is a mental crippling of Barbadians over the last 10 years. We, sir, are debating in a big way whether we should have kiosks or not. I mean, that is the conversation for yesterday. We passed that, Mr. Speaker, sir. And let us talk now about having a conversation about how we can digitalize the entire government. And to make this country the greatest country, not only in the Caribbean, Mr. Speaker, sir, but in the world. With those words, I want to thank you, sir.
Honourable Member for Christchurch South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to begin by first thanking the Honourable Member for St. James North for so courteously providing me today with a legislative brief concerning this amendment. I really want to thank him for that. I know that this is an amendment to make provision for automated passport control kiosks, and I believe this is at the Grantley Adams International Airport. So that what I glean from that, Your Honor, is that the passage of persons into this country is now made easier, and perhaps that is a reminder that we are now into an age, perhaps, in which movement between countries is liberalized. And we may have different feelings as to whether this should be so or whether we should continue to restrict movement of foreign persons into a country. But it seems, Your Honor, that it is a trend, and it is a trend that progressive governments adopt and accept as the proper thing to do in this modern world. Immigration really, at its very simplest level, is nothing greater than the passage of persons into a country. I will say to you, though, Your Honor, that the experience of all of us is that this act of moving into a country evokes great anxiety. It generally evokes great anxiety. In many countries, we stand in the immigration line. I would not identify any countries at this point, but we stand in that line and we are often very nervous and anxious as to what nature of response we will meet from the immigration officer. What inquiry is he going to make of us? And as a previous speaker said, whether we are innocent or guilty in intent, and even the innocent tend to be nervous and anxious when they arrive at immigration counters, when they arrive at the borders of a new country. And should this really be so in a world that likes to think of itself as a unified world? I want to just for a few seconds examine a phenomenon that will really inform the answers to the questions that we seek. I think it was sometime in the late 1980s, around 1989, an American president became famous for asking an Eastern European leader, Mr. Gorbachev, to tear down a wall. And he was referring, of course, to the Berlin Wall. I think, Your Honor, that may have been 1989. Isn't it ironic that some 30 years later, another American president of the same party seeks to build his reputation, no pun intended, on the construction of a wall. And that is extremely ironic that within the space of 30 years, two American presidents of the same party are establishing reputations, one in relation to the tearing down of walls, and the other in relation to the construction of walls. Where do we stand in the Caribbean in relation to that issue? Well, of course, we are divided by water, so the construction of physical walls is not possible. But we live in a region in which there are still psychological walls, in which we are still distant one from the other, and distant in a way that ought not to be occurring among progressive societies. I suppose history has brought us to this point. Quite often you read in the media a description of the English-speaking Caribbean and the non-English-speaking Caribbean. And when we really examine that statement, is that not a way of establishing barriers between these countries. And all it means is that Martinique, for example, is a department of France. All it means is that Martinique was conquered by France and appropriated by France. And the irony is that Jamaica, which is farther away from Barbados, is geopolitically closer to Barbados than Martinique, which is just a few hundred miles away. So that history and language has created these contradictions within the Caribbean. We feel distant, firstly, on the basis of history. We feel distant from each other, secondly, on the basis of language. And need we establish these distances between each other in this part of the world? I know that the legislation focuses much on the traveler from North America and Canada and Europe, since in much of the debate I've heard that it is supposed to facilitate business. But I want to remind the Honorable Minister that a lot of the business travel that is done intra-Caribbean or a lot of the travel that is done intra-Caribbean is also business travel. A former Prime Minister used to remind us that most of our trade is done within the region as opposed to outside of this region, and that is why we need to treat our Caribbean people a lot better than we have tended so to do. I made reference to the language that separates and divides us earlier, and I want to relate to you a very personal experience. And it is not personal to me, we've all experienced this, but some time ago in the early 1990s, I traveled to another country to do a case. When I got to immigration, I was reminded as to my status within that space. They called me a non-belonger. And I thought that was such poignant language as a reminder as to my status in the British Virgin Islands. I was called a non-belonger. How do you say to a man that he is a non-belonger? It is, as I said, it is quite poignant language, and it told me that my stay there was to be brief, and that it was to be specific, and that I was never to become as comfortable as the other person who was described as a belonger. And it was not a colloquialism, it was written within the law of the country that certain persons were categorized as belongers and certain other persons were categorized as non-belongers, and that happened within the Caribbean. I had a similar experience as recently as 2015 when I traveled to the Turks and Caicos Islands to engage myself in litigation. There again, I was called a non-belonger, and these were official titles. Now, I am thinking twice as to whether I should disclose to this House and to this country the last incident in which I was met with similar description, but I will say it, since we all expect each other to speak frankly in here. In South America, Guyana recently, I was engaged in litigation which became, as is the nature of litigation, highly contentious. I say highly contentious so that I do not say bitter. But the lawyer on the other side, when he was addressing the court, I don't know if he was overwhelmed by the argument, legal argument that he had met, but he seized the opportunity to tell the court that I was an alien from across the seas. Yes, I was told this in a court recently within this CARICOM. Of course, on the following day he came back and he apologized to the Court of Appeal for what he had said. I don't mind that he may hear me saying this now, but I think he deserves an answer. And I think he knew that on the following day he had to apologize to the court for addressing a member or a citizen of a fellow CARICOM country as an alien from across the seas. It is the language to which we are more accustomed when we reach the immigration counter in Miami. When Barbadians discover that what they thought was a word reserved for the science fiction movies was affixed to us. We were called aliens in the United States of America. Extremely ironic language coming from a country which sent to us all these science fiction movies in which we found our introduction to the word alien. And that is a word, again, which is written into the official documents concerning themselves with this matter of immigration. So that the point largely is that the question of immigration remains largely unresolved across the world, and it remains largely unresolved within this region. I am happy that our Minister of Immigration is resolving the matter of immigration, not solely and exclusively for European travelers, not solely and exclusively for North American travelers, but also for people who live in the Caribbean. The Caribbean is an interesting place. Again, if I may become anecdotal, I was admitted to the bar in Guyana, I think last year or year before last. And the judge, if he does not mind me saying this, his name was Bovel Drakes. And after the short ceremony of admission, I said to him, "But surely, my lord, you are a Barbadian." And he said, "Yes, I'm a Barbadian, Bovel Drakes." And that is how we recognize each other across this region. You go to Turks and Caicos, for example, where I was, and the Attorney General there was called Brathwaite. And by inquiry, I discovered that her father was a Barbadian. So that this region is not as divided as we have previously thought it to be. There's a writer who says that we are united by sex, and he does not mean that in any vulgar way. What he means is what occurs every day throughout these islands, that people meet each other and they have children, they make families, and those families have origins in St. Lucia, equally as they do in Barbados. There has been a high incidence of intermarriage between Barbadians and Guyanese in recent times. That is not a new phenomenon. Barbadians had gone to Guyana in the 1920s and 30s and settled there, and that is why you go to Guyana now and the name Bovel, Drakes, Brathwaite, Humphrey, these are the names that you will meet when you go to Guyana, and when you meet those names, you know that you are meeting the incidents and the consequence of liberalized immigration. This is a world, Your Honor, in which borders, or the establishment of borders, is a relatively new phenomenon. When Columbus came down here, no immigration officer stopped him. And if you read the seminal work of Professor Ivan van Sertima, when he spoke of who came before Columbus, the book is called They Came Before Columbus. The Africans were down here a long time before Columbus. Nobody stopped them. But of course, the Africans came and they exercised themselves with a rather different purpose. They traded with the indigenous people of this region. Columbus came and he was not about trade. We know that story, and today is not the occasion to repeat that story. But the phenomenon of immigration is a relatively new thing, which has found life, which has emerged with the existence of this thing we call the nation state. Again, the nation state is relatively new. The nation state was born out of the Honorable Member for St. Michael's South spoke about his religion and his church service yesterday. The nation state as we know it, was born out of a tussle, a war between the Protestants and the Catholics. These feudal barons or feudal persons within Europe who went to war over religion. And when that war became settled, the nation-state emerged. And with the emergence of the nation-state, thereafter, years later, you would have found, after World War I, the emergence of nationalism, this fierce insistence on borders, sometime after World War I. But before that, people were moving across the world quite liberally. And I wonder if there is not some justification for free movement across the world, and certainly across this Caribbean. As a previous member said, we have entertained too many fears, built-in fears. We have been born into societies in which we cannot conceive of a world in which an immigration officer is not there to stop you. We cannot conceive of that. Except that around the time that the Statue of Liberty was established in the United States of America in 1886, the passport did not exist. People were moving freely. But we were born into a world in which we have accepted as some human virtue this phenomenon of the border. Now, let us all admit and concede that we must give justification to borders because of terrorism, because of international crime. But outside of those unwholesome designs, the world really is a better place when international movement is liberalized. I hope it was a better place before all these restrictions, but modern mankind would do well to remove some of those restrictions. We in the Caribbean would do a lot better to remove a lot of the restrictions. Professor Beckford said, we in the Caribbean are already united. It is only the politicians who don't know it. That is what he said. And what he was explaining was the phenomenon, for example, when I was a boy, first came to town and saw the St. Lucians selling mangoes on the wharf side. They came, they sold, and they left. Not conquered, they came, they sold, they traded, and they left. I've spoken about the movement of Barbadians into Guyana. An earlier member spoke, Sote Voce, I think, about the movement of Barbadians into Panama, all for the good of mankind. Professor Laming writes about a street in North Trinidad in which every household was a subset of all of the other Caribbean islands. All of us grew up in villages in which there was we used to call them the foreigner, in which a foreigner lived. And we were talking about a St. Lucian, a Vincentian. Nobody knocked on the door and asked them when they came here, why they came here, and for how long they were going to stay. This Caribbean has long been integrated. I said it had been integrated by sex. People got into relationships and made children. And as I've said before, those children had grandparents in St. Lucia, and they had a grandparent in Barbados. Who is to tell them which identity becomes more important? Which immigration department, I beg your pardon, is to tell them which identity must become more important? The other institutions that have united this Caribbean, and the most important of them, our beloved and cherished University of the West Indies, has united this Caribbean in ways that not many other institutions have done. It is a matter of regret that over the last 20 years, that united institution of the University of the West Indies has found itself establishing departments in countries that ought to have continued as genuinely regional organizations. Cricket has united this region. That has become cliched, but it is true. and it was doing so before Saturday last, and it has done so since 1928, and I really hope that it continues to do so. The other institution which we hope will continue to unite this institution would be the Caribbean Court of Justice. I think the Honourable Member for St. James North lamented the loss of Antigua. Yes, indeed. The Leader of the Opposition reminds us that the church, and I want to assure him that I was coming to the church, and the church has done it in a most authentic way. But we've lost Antigua, and Grenada have unfortunately got caught up in local politics, transfiguring itself onto what ought to have been a genuine debate as to membership in the Caribbean Court of Justice. But I think a time will come when the entire Caribbean will genuinely realize that the Privy Council is not really our destination here, and I know you know this. And to the Leader of the Opposition, I will come to the church and say to this court, to this house, and to this country that the church has managed in a very interesting and peculiar way to transcend the prejudices that meet persons who are not born among us. I grew up in a church, Your Honor, and when the preacher came from overseas, we used to be so fascinated. I grew up, permit me to say this, Mr. Speaker, the Wesleyan Holiness Church, called the Pilgrim Holiness Church in older times. And they had a college called the Caribbean Pilgrim College on Barbary Hill. What better example of positive integration than that? And while people look with suspicion upon foreigners, let us call them foreigners for the time being, and I'm glad the Leader of the Opposition brought this to my attention. People in the church tend not to look on church leaders with suspicion when they come from outside, so that the church has been in the vanguard of the integration movement in a very real way, without the prejudices, without the xenophobia to which the honourable member for St. Michael South referred to. The church has been in that vanguard, more so than most other institutions, and I'm obliged for the reminder. So that, Your Honour, yes, Mr. Speaker, I want to commend the legislation. I want to say, though, to the Minister that we should be reaching, in terms of this legislation, beyond business and commerce. And I know the Honourable Member for St. Philip West would want us not only to be reminded of the commercial relationships, but the cultural ties as well. That immigration into this country has great potential when we reach across the seas into St. Vincent and St. Lucia and establish those cultural relationships which have been able to bind us for over 300 years, and not to restrict this legislation to business expediency, but to see ourselves with a common history. And as the Honourable Member for St. Michael East would always remind us, to see ourselves with that common destiny. He says it in here very often, and we smile, but he is right. And so, Your Honour, I want to commend this legislation to my colleagues. I want to commend this legislation to the country. I want to urge the country not to view outsiders with suspicion. And that is the point, not to view them as potential threats to our lives and our livelihoods, but to see them all as part of a globe which really within the larger scheme of God's things is really a small place. And that the walls that we seek to establish, whether we are establishing them in New Mexico or elsewhere, are walls that remain inimical to the future of mankind. And with those few words, Your Honour, I am obliged to you.
Honourable Member for St. Michael.
Mr. Speaker, it is always always a difficult task to follow the thoughtful brilliance of the Honourable Member for Christchurch South, especially when he so eloquently, as he very often does, expresses himself. But I find myself faced with that challenge today. That is entirely my own fault. Thankfully, it doesn't happen too often. Now, I want to start where the Honourable Member for Christchurch West Central took us. And I know he was cautioned that he was veering a little away from the core of the matter before us. Today he was, playing up balls outside of Austin, a little wide.
Yes, right.
And I thought
not to play.
I thought so myself.
Not to play if it is wide in T20 cricket, it would be a wide. Yeah. So if it is a wide in Test cricket, it is a wide.
It's still a wide. And I thought so myself, Mr. Speaker, but on reflection, maybe it wasn't that wide, because essentially this matter is not only about kiosks. It's about service and service efficiency and improving that. But it's also about security. And that cannot be understated. And I will not necessarily talk about guns as he did. But I want to pick up, as I start, on one matter which the Honourable Member for St. James North put to us. Going beyond the immediacy of this bill, he suggested that by February 1st, we will realize the departure of immigration officers and immigration control and checks from the departure point at the airport. And while I, in principle, have no problem with the removal of such, because we see it obtaining elsewhere, but at the same time, we have to admit that it is still very much in place in very many places in this world, and we have to utilize those systems when we travel to other people's countries. But the point is this: it has to do with the timing, Mr. Speaker. Today, as a country, we are trying to wrestle the evil of that rising tide of serious and violent criminal activity to the ground. Today, we're becoming increasingly aware that the phenomenon of violent crime is not a matter that is localized, but that it is organized transregionally, transnationally, and therefore the issue of cross-border activity becomes a critical consideration. And I find it a bit challenging that when today, immediately today, we are faced with that rising specter of criminal violence, and we're met with an understanding that part of the dynamic contributing to that is cross-border travel and cross-border movement and interregional travel. We just had a regional conference here of sorts in the past few days. We had visiting prime ministers here. We had some who were contacted by teleconference facilities. And that's the focus, criminal activity, because of the interregional nature of some of the dynamics involved in that. I find it a little challenging as to the timing of removing officers from the departure point at the airport. I'm saying in principle, I have no problem with the removal at the right time and over time, but it is this government that must judge, and it is this particular minister that must judge whether or not this is the most appropriate time to do that. Now, Mr. Speaker, I have no problem with the kiosks used for passport examinations and acquisition of information and stuff like that. Not at all. Once it is properly managed, and once issues of privacy are appropriately dealt with. I also have to query the matter of staff assistants. I think the Honourable Member for St. James North called them facilitation officers to be employed. There was no indication as to the number of these particular officers to be employed. I do not know if that ministry, the government, or wherever the responsible authority is reposed, has been able to conduct an evaluation and assessment as to determine what the level of staff, this specific category of staff would be and would be required to make this service an efficient one. If the service is to be efficient, the numbers have to be sufficient. Now, you are making a statement like this at a time when in the public service, the buzzword is retrenchment, not recruitment. Retrenchment. The only persons being recruited nowadays are consultants, over which I have not raised any quarrel. I want to state that. The government is entitled to have any number of consultants that it thinks to be necessary, and it should not be put abroad that the leader of the opposition has objected to the number of consultants engaged by government. I have never made any such objection. The public is doing that. What I have raised have been questions with respect to one or two consultants as to what their specific roles are, how much they are paid, and who are paying them. And I'm yet to receive a response on that particular matter. So the buzzword in public service circles today is retrenchment. The minister is indicating that there will be some recruitment. And the question, therefore, relates to the levels prospectively insofar as that is concerned. While I do not object, as I said, to the kiosks being used, the question of space, the capacity has to be a part very much so of the issue. Do we have that type of capacity available to us at the time at which we would be seeking to implement this kind of mechanism for processing passengers through Grantley Adams Airport? All of us have been there. We have seen the congestion in the current context when there are large volumes of passengers coming into the airport. I don't know where these kiosks are going to be located. I don't know how many there are. I heard a number, 17. But the space issue is one that I query, because unless you have proper capacity in terms of space for providing the service, you can end up defeating the purpose that you're seeking to serve. Do not know what level of testing has been done. I heard some numbers given as to suggest that once the kiosks are installed, there would be a certain level of improvement in the service in terms of the number of passengers that could be processed using that mechanism, as opposed to the current situation where you have to use the immigration officers. I don't know what level of testing has been done, and perhaps that needs to be better clarified. And I hope it is not simply a case of us looking at the experience elsewhere and extrapolating from that experience and then building it into our situation, because there are certain peculiarities and particularities which might be very much a part of our context, which do not necessarily apply elsewhere, Mr. Speaker. Now, if I hear correctly, one of the things that immigration staff complain about is a lack of staff, the understaffing situation at the immigration department. And sometimes I think, and it can happen to any government, there is that conflicting dynamic present with respect to formulation and attempts to execute policy. So we have a government here that is telling us that our policy thrusts will ensure that we have greater numbers of people visiting our shores. That will come through tourism travel, that will come through investment increase and stuff like that. And therefore the numbers coming into our port will increase. What I hear from the minister today is that when you put in the kiosk, it will enable you to withdraw from the front lines of service a number of immigration officers who can then be made to do more clerical stuff, more administrative stuff, more desk stuff, other related activity. It seems that here is an area for potential conflict, which therefore will have to be properly managed. Now, I am sure the immigration people will be up to that because they're skilled and qualified people. Some of them I know for a long time, very committed to the work. And I am sure, despite what some others would want to purport or project, that the honorable member from St. James North is quite adequate to the task as a minister. And I want to put that there into the record too. So I'm simply saying you got to be careful with the potential conflict that may arise between varying policy thrusts. So you want to increase numbers, you want to reduce frontline staff. It's a situation that you then have properly to manage. But my honorable friend from St. James North, I am sure, is up to that. So let's have the automated kiosks. But we have to ensure that the rate, the pace at which we are able to install them keeps in sync with the rate of increase in terms of the numbers of people coming into the airport at a time when you're reducing officers on the front line doing the normal assessment duties, Mr. Speaker. I'm told as well that the passport area, particularly so at the new immigration facility down Lower Bridgetown, is inadequate. Now, I raise this, Mr. Speaker, because we're talking about service. And whereas we want to improve service to the traveling public, we want to improve service to tourists coming here, we have to be careful that we provide the best working situation for the staff expected to give that service, and that we provide the best situation as well for local people having to interface with the immigration department at its facilities downtown. And we cannot be so preoccupied with offering good quality service to those who come from Europe and North America and not spend a sufficient time and expend a sufficient interest ensuring that the staff of the immigration department are properly accommodated and that the public that must interact with them on a daily basis are also properly accommodated. Because if stress is faced by the public, that stress will then be targeted to officers who then have to deal with that. We therefore have to have a holistic approach to improving the service context so that those who render the service are as fully embraced and thought of as those who benefit or who benefit from or who seek that particular service, Mr. Speaker. I want to raise an issue which might be slightly controversial, but I try to listen. I tried to talk to a few people on top of Broad Street and in the middle of Swan Street, and I invite the honorable member of St. Peter to join me one of these days. Meet a lot of people there who tell you, quite frankly, how they feel. They tell you the good and the bad. Boy, we don't stop wasting your time. Boy, keep an eye on them for us, so you get the good and the bad. And one of the things that I am concerned about, and I draw this to the attention of the Honorable Member St. James North, and he probably has already been apprised of that matter, is the abuse of the system, or potential abuse of the system, more than potential, the apparent abuse of the system by people who come under CARICOM Skilled National status. Because you can qualify as a CARICOM Skilled National. You can get the requisite accreditation. But then your purpose for coming here may be totally different. And what you give yourself to while you are here may be totally at odds with the best interests of Barbados and Barbadian values, and may be totally at odds with your stated reasons for being here. And this is one of the things that has been addressed to me, that this system needs to be better policed, because there's some people who are abusing that. You qualify, you come as a CARICOM Skilled National, and your access into this country is made easier, your accommodation here is made easier in terms of the regulations, but then you are engaging in activities which do not accord with those related to your CARICOM Skilled National status. It needs to be better policed. That's what I've been told. I am not on the inside, I am on the outside, just lending a listening ear. But I give that advice to my honorable friend, who I know is both disciplined and diligent about his responsibilities in government. Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to go to Antigua. I'm not going to go to the Privy Council. I'm not going to go to the CCJ. My honorable friend from St. James, Northway, all of those places. I'm not going to go to North America like my honorable, very eloquent colleague from Christchurch South. I want to stay around the airport and around the immigration. Health service and security. The Red Caps, Mr. Speaker. The Red Caps service, I believe, in Barbados over the years has suffered from being devalued and not sufficiently appreciated. Now, we can get very sophisticated, we can get very modern, we can get very high-tech, and we can try to emulate and walk in the footpaths of those who are better developed and better off economically than we are. But in Barbados, in our developing country context with limited opportunity, we have to find ways and means of employing our people. And I think when it comes to things like Red Cap service, this should not be devalued as it has been. I never agreed with the decision to do away with the Red Cap service. I understand that trolleys and all kinds of stuff were purchased and are still stored, and that was supposed to replace as a method of assisting people out of the airport and into the airport. That was supposed to replace the Red Caps. The Red Caps have seemingly diminished in number. And all I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, is that is a service which potentially can employ more people. That is a service which should not be devalued. These people need to be properly trained, need to be understood to be on the front line of the Barbadian welcome. They're very much a part of our culture, very much a part of what Barbados is known for as neighborliness and friendliness and cordiality and courtesy and service. And this group of people, properly trained, should not in any way suffer from any view that we are a modern economy now, we are a modern society now, we are a modern airport facility now, and therefore we have to depart from this type of method of service to embrace what is used elsewhere by economies that can afford to do away with that type of service. So I want to make, Mr. Speaker, a plug on behalf of those who still serve as Red Caps. There's another category of persons whose interests I want also to promote, and that is registered and licensed taxi operators at the airport. because their business opportunities are being diminished and raided by a group of people. I think the name given to them is snatchers. I had not known, I have seen it, but I had not known that that is what they were called until recently. But snatchers, Mr. Speaker, you knew that. You know just about everything, don't you? Snatchers, snatchers, Mr. Speaker, are those who, for those who don't know, those who don't walk around very far or very much. Snatchers are those unlicensed, those non-permitted vehicles that trespass upon the province of license and permit holding taxi operators at the airport and pick up passengers. Not only is it a matter of negatively impacting the work prospects and therefore the financial prospects of registered taxi operators, but Mr. Speaker, pause a moment to reflect on the times, the climate of the time. All it will require is one incident where some person criminally deranged or criminally bent turns up at the airport, offers to some poor white woman transport from the airport to her hotel or guest house or wherever, and then, Mr. Speaker, some unfortunate incident results. In today's world, that goes all over the world in a hurry. In today's world, social media will make up Barbados to be that type of place. Simply saying that is an activity that we need to get on top of. It is eroding the profit prospects of those who legitimately do the activity and pay for the privilege, and it is jeopardizing potentially the reputation of a small, innocent country which we love, called Barbados. Speaker, I'm made to understand as well that we have a problem because we're talking service. We have a problem with a lack of facilities available to passengers overnight at the airport. Restaurant facilities, no place of comfort or convenience to rest oneself. And I know that that opportunity is limited in many airports in the world, but certainly you should be able to find some place, Mr. Speaker, get a drink or a sandwich, if by chance you have to spend the night in the airport. And I'm talking not only staff, I'm talking about guests, our guests from over and away, as we say, who for some reason or another must have to spend the night, much of it or all of it, in the airport. And there's absolutely nothing available to you. Absolutely nothing available to you but perhaps a chair. And thankfully, a bathroom. Once, unlike those ones down at Kensington Oval, the bathrooms work. So I'm asking that the minister responsible, I know that that is not necessarily the province of purview of my friend from St. James North, but if we're talking service, we have to talk of it in holistic terms, because you can process people quickly, but if something happens beyond the point of process, then you are delayed, and there are no facilities available to you, then we're still dealing with passengers who have had poor service and who are likely to spread the word that Barbados is known for its poor service. Mr. Speaker, unless you stop me, I will raise the question and ask for clarity. We need to know what we are doing, what the government is planning to do with respect to airport ownership and airport management. We've heard some half statements. Are we going to be selling any aspect of the operations at the airport? Are we going to be issuing contracts for any aspects of service provided through the airport that we don't normally now have contracted out? The government needs to speak with clarity, not leave these matters to speculation, not make them the subject of rumor, but speak with clear voice, because the question will always be asked, why do you seek to sell the airport or any aspect of its operations if in fact...
I
would not normally engage in such behavior, but I'm seriously having to ask the relevance of some of what I'm listening to in terms of what we are discussing. And you so rightfully pointed out to another member that we were dealing with a specific topic relating to the use of kiosks in the Grantley Adams International Airport. I am now sitting here having to go through what is becoming very painful, questions about things that really have no relevance to what we're discussing. So I'm just trying to seek some clarity from you, sir, as to where we stand. Thank you.
Point taken, Honorable Person Philip West. FF, the Honorable Person Michael West can ensure the interrelatedness as it relates to the ownership of and or part ownership of the GAIA to the whole issue of the kiosk. I am sure this chamber would appreciate that. Honorable member.
Mr. Speaker, if you wanted to own a plantation, you would be very concerned as to what the cost of that plantation would be. You would be very concerned as to the neighborhood in which that plantation existed. You would be very much concerned about many things in relation to that plantation, which have nothing to do with the specific fact that I want a plantation. Now, Mr. Speaker, I said that to say this to you, that if we're talking about providing kiosks at the airport in order to facilitate service, this is a debate about service. If you are talking about putting a kiosk at the airport, then you have to tell me that tomorrow you are going to own the airport, and that you're going to be managing the immigration services at the airport, and that the customs services at the airport will not be contracted out, and that the security services at the airport will be managed either under contract or by the public service. If these things are not relevant, tell me so. Let me sit down right now.
Continue, but just get to the point. Continue. I remember, Mr. Michael.
So we're back at ownership. So we're back at ownership.
Not about plantation.
Not about plantations. If government has in mind affecting certain changes at the airport, and it is saying so, and preparing the legislation to make that possible, then I'm simply saying government needs to go the next step. Having said partially, a bit unclearly, as to what their intentions are relative to the facility, they need to tell us what specifically is the plan for ownership and management of the facility that will be providing these services to the people of Barbados and our guests, and the security considerations around them. Now, if the airport is profitable, as I understand it is, then you have to ask yourself as to the advisability of selling that. I'm not going to go very far on that. That's another story for another day. It disturbs my honorable friend from St. Philip West, so I'm not going to cause him any more stress. That is another story for another day. I hope that he will, the honorable member that is, would therefore entertain my next question or issue. And it has to do with what is happening with the pavement works at the airport. Now, when we talk about pavement works in relation to the airport, of course, we're not talking sidewalks. We're talking about the parking apron. We're talking about the runway. We're talking about those facilities at the airport that facilitate landing and parking and taking off of aircraft. We had talked about resurfacing. We're talking about resurfacing. I'm just asking where we are with that and what is the plan for that going forward. And are we, because we're talking service, you don't only service passengers when they get off the plane and walk through the arrivals lounge or when they're about to go through the departure lounge. You're servicing airline companies. You're servicing aircraft that must land and park and take off. And you're providing a context of service for those who on the ground must service those aircraft and those entities in various ways. My question is, are we maintaining our standards at the airport with respect to the quality of pavements? It has to do with what they call riderability. I've landed at Adams Airport and it has felt a bit rough. As the plane comes up, they have felt that elsewhere. But this is an important matter, Mr. Speaker. This is an important matter. Because if we can't meet, and here's where we are, Mr. Speaker. We're moving to kiosks and stuff like that because we want to be keeping pace with international standards. When we keep pace with international standards in things like kiosks and processing passengers, we also have to keep international standards with respect to things like riderability. And that has to do with movement of aircraft on the pavement where it works at the airport. Mr. Speaker, we want to increase numbers. We want to process people more quickly. And that will mean that as we expand, different types of aircraft will come here. And therefore we have to be concerned about the capacity of the airport. We used to have the #1 categorization in the Caribbean, Mr. Speaker. We've lost a little bit on that. Is the airport runway wide enough to accommodate the most modern of the aircraft? The A380 is a big aircraft carrying lots and lots of people. Well, we can't process them if they can't come and if that plane can't land here. And I'm simply saying, is there any plan to increase the width from, I think it's 180 feet of the airport runway to a wider capacity to accommodate that type of aircraft landing and to avoid, Mr. Speaker, the risk associated with an aircraft too wide for your existing runway? The wingspan therefore has to go off the pavement works onto grassy areas, potentially picking up stuff through the pull of the engines and stuff like that that can cause all kinds of stress. We remember the demise of the Concorde. But Mr. Speaker, I promise my honorable friend from the city that I would not speak for too long. I support the use of the kiosks. I support the efforts to improve the service to the traveling public. I do have a bit of a caution with respect to the removal of the immigration control at departure point at this time when we're wrestling with crime, an upsurge in crime, part of which has to do with interregional movement. Mr. Speaker, with that, I am finished.
Honourable Member for St. James North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I move now to wrap up this debate today, I wish to thank all those honourable members who contributed to this debate, members on the government side, the Honourable Member for St. Lucie and Christchurch, West Central, and of course Honourable Member for Christchurch South, who would have brought in, of course, the wider CARICOM issue, and especially the Honourable Member for St. Michael South, who has given us insight into what I am very well assuming and looking forward to his speech when we bring a debate on fuller immigration reform, as I said, hopefully in the next few months. and when he spoke about, the need for us not being so introspective in our outlook as Barbadians, but understanding that we are part of a wider region and, in fact, wider world. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition has raised some points, and of course most of them, sir, lay outside of my ministerial mandate, the airport, so I can't respond to him on those issues. I'm sure there will be opportunity in the near future for the Honourable Minister for Tourism to respond to him on, and the Honourable Prime Minister to respond to him on the issues which he raised relating to the airport. But as we vow to be transparent and accountable, sir, I will respond to him on the issues that he raised arising out of the ambit of this debate. I said during my opening presentation, sir, on the space issue of the kiosks, sir, and probably the honourable member might have been otherwise engaged when I mentioned that. I said that the kiosks, and he's free, sir. I mean, as leader of the opposition, he's free to ask the Honourable Minister for Tourism, who has mandate over the airport. I could accompany him too, sir, to go and have sight of the kiosks, and he would see that they don't take up any big set of space, sir. In fact, I said during my presentation that it is estimated that their full utilization, the 16, 17 that are there now, will only engage 50% of the space that is presently used now by the immigration booths, sir. So we're cutting, I realize, we're cutting down on space. So in terms of the honourable member raised this issue on 2 occasions, so I have to address it, seeking to now imply that a decision to remove immigration from the departure hall may very well now be not the correct decision because of a perception of disorder and lawlessness. Recent events. There's absolutely no linkage to that. As we've said, sir, we have ensured that border security will be protected. Border security is paramount for this government, as it ought to be for any government. National security, one of the first responsibilities of any government is the national security, the protection of its people. And there'll be no compromise on this, sir. As I said, we have ensured that we have information, and information is key. Real-time information, data on persons who may be undesirable or who may cause problems in a flight, sir. And we would not, as a responsible government, make this step if there was any doubt that there will be a diminishing of protection on that front, sir. So I want to assure the honourable member and Barbados as a whole and the wider world that this decision does not compromise whatsoever our national security, because other provision is made for this information, sir, to be passed on to the relevant authorities in real time. The honourable leader of the opposition raised the issue about staffing accommodation at immigration headquarters. Not fully on board, sir, with this debate, but still, since it's immigration, sir, I mean, as we know, immigration moved into new headquarters about 6 months ago, sir. Well, fully moved in, I think, around August last year, yeah. And look, there's never a perfect world. there may still be a couple issues, but it is much better than what they were in before, sir. Certainly before the election. And I just to let him know, and the public, sir, I have yesterday invited the trade union officials of the Immigration Department to meet with me next week on whatever issues they may have outstanding pertaining to their staff, sir. And this is what I've been doing recently, engaging the union reps, the workers reps of all the departments under my ministry, whether it's fire, whether it is prisons, and we will come around to the rest, sir. And because, you know, we're all in this together. This is a partnership which clearly involves the labor movement as well. All of us have to work together to ensure that the quality of life is as good as it can be for our citizens, and that includes the workers, the public servants, those employed by the government. So have no fear there, Honourable Leader of the Opposition. In terms of the CARICOM skill national status, I mean, this of course is part of a regional agreement, the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, and we have passed local law, sir, the CARICOM Skill Nationals Act. I believe it was in 2005, sir, when in fact the honourable member, if I speak correctly, was part of the process of immigration, either as Minister of State or Parliamentary Secretary, sir. So I'm a bit lost on that point, sir. But to say that clearly, if someone who qualifies and obtains CARICOM skill national status, as we are obliged to give them, being part of the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas and part of the CARICOM community, if they are found subsequently to be, for whatever reason, in breach of some law, found to be undesirable, sir, their status can be revoked, sir. I mean, that is always a reservation of any government, and certainly the government of Barbados on this point. So there's absolutely no problem with that, sir. And I want to say, sir, clearly the immigration and that point, as well as the point on the decision to remove immigration from the departure hall. Immigration is certainly, from what I've seen, sir, from the time I become minister, on par with their duties as border security agents. So, I mean, we all know that immigration was involved in an operation in terms of people who were in breach of the human trafficking legislation of Barbados, and acted expeditiously on that particular issue a couple months, 2 or 3 months ago, in concert with our police force. So immigration officers are well trained on this issue, and certainly will assist in all ways in terms of border security, and ensure that the border security of Barbados will not be compromised. The facilitation officers, sir, which arose out of this debate, and of course is defined, as I said, in the regulations, which will pass or which will fall under these amendments, sir. I mean, it isn't that the government employing a riffle of facilitation officers, sir. The reality of the situation is that if you have no kiosks and utilization of them, and there are going to be some people, some travelers who may not be as comfortable using them as others are, the young, high-tech people, sir. The reality is you have to have somebody to help them. I believe that there may be 4. I'm not so sure. As I said, sir, they're going to be appointed by the airport. Some are in place. The feeling was 4 during peak time. But, I mean, don't let it seem that we're hiring this big set of workers. I mean, that is far from the truth and reality. So, as I said, the other aspects, I would be outside my ministerial mandate, the red caps and the airport to be sold. All I could say, sir, there's absolutely no cabinet decision on those peripheral issues that the honorable leader of the opposition raised during the course of this debate. He said that he didn't want to touch on CCJ and issues such as that, which I raised earlier, sir, and which the honourable member for Christchurch South, the erudite and accomplished attorney at law as he is, also continued. But I would hope, sir, that the honourable leader of the opposition position, especially now that he has formed this new party, is different, sir, from that opinion of his appointed senator in the other place who downcried and shamed the CCJ, said that we should not be in it and cuss it bad on the floor of the Senate recently. I mean, I don't understand that. How people who have pride in themselves and where we came from and our intellect and our educational institutions and our University of the West Indies, which has been acknowledged, I believe, as among the top 5 universities in the world, and the judges sitting on the Caribbean Court of Justice, the majority of them have come from the University of the West Indies. In fact, quite a few of them now were at the University of the West Indies law faculty in my time, sir, 40 years ago. And of course, we congratulate the first Barbadian to go on the CCJ, sir, recently appointed. Professor at the same university, sir. So this is the ethos which right now constitutes the membership of the Caribbean Court of Justice, but yet the leader of the opposition, sportsman, and we have to say that this for now is representative of his party now that he's formed the party, feels that this is not good enough for the people. So I would hope that the leader of the opposition has risen to disassociate himself from the statements of his appointed senator.
Honourable Member Mr. Michael West.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order.
The honourable member for St. James North is misleading the House. I expressed in this debate no negative view with respect to the CCJ or the Privy Council or any other institution. I simply said I would not be going as far as to speak to those matters today. That's all I said. So I do not know where all this talk about party is coming from. And Mr. Speaker, the honourable member from St. James North should be happy about the prospects of a new party because he may need to change his political address from what we're hearing on the street.
Continue, honourable member for St. James North.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know what point of order. What point of order that's we into a serious debate, and the honourable leader of the opposition was given an opportunity to disassociate himself from the remarks of his appointed senator, who criticised the CCJ and basically said we should not be part of it, etc. I don't know if he wants us to go back in the Privy Council, and the honourable member, I know, made no such disassociation, but I can assure the honourable member that I mean, no one will do like him, win on a party ticket, and then...
Honourable member.
Yes, sir.
What's the point of order?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is misleading the House, and far be it from me to express any opinion as to your judgment on the matter. I do not know where all this talk about party and disassociating oneself with an opinion in the other house is coming from. What the honourable member from St. James North needs to concern himself about is to who may disassociate themselves from him. Okay. I was very charitable to the honourable member. If he wants to go down that road, I can go with him.
Honourable member, there's no point of order. No point of order.
Mr. Speaker, let's get back on track, sir. Sir, I am happy to have the support of the whole House, sir, on this bill brought before Parliament today. And as I said, this is something that we ought to have done before. It is part of the ease of doing business with Barbados at the first point of contact on entry into Barbados, and we look forward to the full utilization of the kiosks and the speeding up of the whole process relating to immigration and by extension customs as well. I'm obliged to you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the bill be read a second time. Yeah. Okay.
Question that this bill be read a second time. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I beg that Your Honour now leave the chair.
Honourable member, there's no chairman of committees at this point, so that this House, understanding Order 5, subsection 5, must elect a chairman of committees.
Right. I beg to move that the honourable member for Christchurch South be elected the chairman of committee, sir.
The question is that the honourable member for Christchurch South be elected chairman of committees. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. The honourable member for Christchurch South is so elected. No.
Mr. Speaker, I beg now to move that Your Honour now leave the chair and that the House resolve itself into committee to further consider this bill.
Question that the Speaker do leave the chair and the House resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
This House is now in committee.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Clause 1 stand part.
Beg second.
Question is that Clause 1 now stand part.
No, you don't.
All those members in favour, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 2. Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Clause 2 stand part.
Question is that Clause 2 now stand part? Oh, I beg your pardon. You second it? Yes. The question is that Clause 2 now stand part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Aye. All against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 3.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Clause 3 stand part.
Beg to second that.
Question is that Clause 3 now stand part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
All against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 4. Clause 4.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Clause 4 stand part.
Question
Beg
is
to
that
second that.
Beg your pardon. Do it again, please.
Beg to second that.
The question is that Clause 4 now stand part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Aye. All against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
4.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that you do now report to His Honour the Speaker the passing of one bill in committee.
Question is that I now report to His Honour the Speaker the passing of one bill.
Second.
All those second, please.
Second, please.
Thank you.
Give a second. Minister.
Seconded. Yes. All those in favour? Aye. Please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it. Thank you.
Chairman of committees has reported the passing of one bill in committee.
Speaker, I beg to move that this bill be read a third time.
Question is that this bill be read a third time. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this bill do now pass and be cited as the Immigration Amendment Act 2019.
Question that this bill be now passed and so cited. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This bill is so passed and so cited.
Mr. Speaker, that brings us to the end of government's business for the day, and I beg to move that this Honourable House be adjourned until Tuesday, the 5th of February at 10 a.m.
Question is that this Honourable House be adjourned until the 5th day of February at 10 a.m. in the forenoon. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. This Honourable House stands adjourned until the 5th day of February at 10 a.m. in the forenoon.